This is an update on our very first episode, Who Killed Gayle Anne Cater? Honestly, I did not expect to be back here so soon. We released that first episode. I wasn't sure what would happen. Cases this old can go quiet, people move on, memories fade, and truth gets buried. I even wondered whether anyone was still out there who knew something, or if they would be willing to say it. But I underestimated the power of storytelling and putting a story like this back into the world. In less than a week, the messages started coming in. New information, new voices, new leads. 3 tips stood out. One of them stopped me in my tracks. I want to be clear, these leads have not been independently verified. I hope law enforcement or other ongoing investigations will continue to review any credible information.
Walking proof.
Shampoo and PJ.
Walking proof.
Tell me what you know. Shampoo PJ. Take me down that road.
Walking proof.
Truth in the dark. Oh, tell me now.
Walking proof.
Leave a mark.
Welcome to Walking Proof, a true crime podcast with PJ and Shampoo. I'm Joseph Bales, your co-host, also known as PJ. And I'm Shannon Bales, your host and author of Walking Proof. I'm also known as Shampoo. So Shannon, as we get into today's episode, let's acknowledge some of the feedback that we have received from those first few episodes. Absolutely. First, I want to start by saying thank you, truly. I'm going to take time. We'll read a couple of reviews. Here's one of my favorites. It was an inbox message on our Facebook, Walking Proof with PJ and Shampoo. She says, I am a huge true crime junkie, and I listen to podcasts every day while at work. I listened to yours today, and I wanted to say, keep going. Sometimes I'll pick a new podcast, and I'll lose interest or their voices suck. You've got it all going on. Please keep going. Make more. So those kind of things just mean the world to us. They really do. And, we've heard from so many people over the past few weeks, and your words of encouragement are really, really appreciated. Yes. Another listener wrote a review and said, wow, what a different take. A true crime podcast birthed from heartbreak and confusion to answers and healing. Thank you for sharing your story, because in that you are sharing your mother's story and others' stories, true life stories, cases that, like your mother's, deserved so much more. I pray this journey helps the healing process for many. Yes. We have also heard from several people, in addition to that, who've actually had information about Gayle Cater's case. We have. And that's why we've delayed the episode that we were going to release today. Today is going to be a bonus episode to update you on what we have learned since we first aired Gayle's story on July 2nd. So, Shannon, you have recently heard from people who went to high school with Gayle. Yeah. Some who lived in the same apartment complex. You've also heard from people who knew you who also knew Gayle. And I know that you are going to have more to say about all of that shortly. Yeah, we've heard from a lot of people. Some of the connections is kind of eerie to me. A couple of examples real quick. They don't mean anything to the case. They're just coincidental. But my mom's best friend's niece was in the same class as Gayle. My Sunday school teacher marched in the band with Gayle, knew about her murder, but knew so much about my birth mother and the mom who raised me and my story. And so it's just wild, the connections. And we have heard from a lot of people that knew Gayle personally, or at least had heard her story. We have. In the first episode, we did talk about two suspects who were investigated in the case, and also why you thought that your biological father, Douglas Lamar Williams, could have been responsible just based on all the circumstantial evidence that you uncovered during the research process. So today we are going to dive into the new information that we learned over the past few weeks. And, you never can tell. Some of it might change things.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this episode and you haven't listened to that pilot episode that aired July 2nd, Who Killed Gayle Anne Cater, uh, we'll just give you a little brief background here. If you get some time, it's a deeper dive. Go listen to it.
Exactly. So if you haven't listened to that episode, you definitely would want to because you can get all of the details that we're not going to talk about in today's bonus episode. But that episode talked about the details of the abduction, the sexual assault, the gruesome murder of Gail Ann Cater, a 27-year-old who was living her best life, working at Brown and Root. She resided at 670 Maxey Road, right off of Federal and I-10 there in East Houston.
Yeah. And the first update that we want to discuss, we had mentioned on that episode that Gail was dating a man by the name of Gary. We had already determined that he was still married while he was seeing Gail. That alone was pretty suspicious to me.
Exactly. And we talked about on the last episode of how we had been told that Gary, who had been dating Gail, was a married man. Um, but we had also heard that he was going through a divorce. I remember discussing in the last episode how the relationships can be really complicated. So maybe, Gary and his wife were going through like an on again, off again type relationship. We just don't
Right.
know.
Yeah, we don't. And so just to recreate that timeline very quickly, we learned that Gary had married his wife in August of 1970. We were told he was going through a divorce, but when he and Gail were dating in September of October 1978, when she was assaulted and murdered.
Exactly. And so you found out that Gary and his wife did not
Right.
divorce until November 1991. So that was 13 years after he and Gail were dating.
Right.
So this story already had the appearance that possibly Gary and his wife were not going through a divorce, as we were previously told. I even mentioned, that you just can't take a marriage record and a divorce record and tell a true story about a marriage. People can be separated,
Right.
or it could have been an affair. I mean, we just don't know. But then you uncovered some additional records over the last couple of weeks, and that could tell a different story.
I did. I was looking at the property records, and what I found just adds another layer. Property records are public information. They can be accessed by anyone. So that's why I'm able to share this piece of information with you today. Less than a year after Gail's death, I think it was closer to the 6-month mark. Remember, we thought Gary was going through a divorce, but actually, they were married for years. But Gary and his wife actually purchased together. And from what I can tell, a new construction home was built, and both of their names was on the deed.
So, that piece of information makes a difference. So we're talking about Gary and Gail dating at the time of her assault and murder in September 1978.
Right.
And just a few months later, over in 1979, it definitely appears that Gary and his wife were not going through a divorce or were not separated. If you're building a new home together and you don't divorce for another 13 years,
Yeah.
The story that we heard, the going through a divorce, being separated, those stories just don't add up so much anymore.
Yeah. That's correct. Not for me. And, you know, and I remember you talking in the original episode again, relationships, complicated, all kinds of scenarios that, the narrative could fit. So, with this information about the purchase of a new home together, no matter whatever was happening with Gary and Gail, that discovery is at least noteworthy.
And it is noteworthy. It certainly doesn't sound like the marriage was ending as we were told in the beginning.
No, it doesn't.
And that unfortunately makes it sound more like it may have been an affair between Gary and Gail, Who knows? We weren't there. We don't know. But,
Right.
the information that you're uncovering, it matters.
Right.
I will state that we don't know for sure what was happening. We can only lay out the facts that you've uncovered in public records. I do want to say something right here that we covered very clearly in that episode. While Gary was a suspect in this case, he was cleared of any wrongdoing and was never charged with any crimes regarding Gale's attack and murder.
That's correct. And just so you don't think I have tunnel vision, I'm going to talk about, uh, you know, the the boyfriend. The second suspect that we talked about in the first episode. It was said that Gail had dated a guy in high school.
With a temper.
Yeah, with a temper. One listener who knew his name, because he was cleared as a suspect, he's still living. I didn't mention his name out loud, but a listener knew who I was talking about, and they sent me a address that was listed in Baytown, Chambers County. Uh, Actually, the address said Baytown, but today that area is Mont Bellevue, right off I-10. So now I need to be very clear that I have not confirmed that this is the same man. All I can say is the name matches and the year of birth approximately matches. It needs further investigation, but a listener did send me that, and that's very noteworthy.
So you did have some demographic information, biological data that it appears to be the same person. And certainly the timing certainly adds up.
Yeah, it does. So it was a divorce that happened in 1978, a few months prior to Gail's attack. And if that is the same man, and if this is indeed the correct person, then leaving Gail's apartment on Maxey Road and heading east, it would have put him much closer to where Gail's body was found.
Exactly.
So to me, that direction wise, that's noteworthy, something to look a little deeper into.
And again, it's not proof. And we want to make it clear that the high school boyfriend was investigated and never charged in any wrongdoing in Gail's case.
That's correct.
So, Shannon, you learned these things since that last episode. And in addition, you also heard from someone else who listened and had some additional information.
That's correct. So, you know, the two pieces of information that we just shared, those are interesting, but I don't think that's a smoking gun. Just something noteworthy that's worth looking into. But I did receive a message from a listener. She told me she knew who Gail was. They went to the same high school, different years. But she remembered when Gail was murdered. And what she said next stopped me in my tracks. She said, I listened to your episode and I was familiar with Gail's case, but I had no idea when you mentioned the address at 670 Maxey Road. I lived there.
She did. The same apartment complex.
Around the same time.
At around the same time, same address, 670 Maxey Road.
Yeah. She gave me permission to share what she shared with me. She asked that I would keep her anonymous. So for this episode, we're going to call her Sue. Sue is more than willing to share her identity with the authorities and anybody who behind the scenes. But for the purpose of this episode, we're going to talk about Sue. Sue told me that she was newly married. She was pregnant. Her husband worked evenings, and at night she would do laundry in that complex. And that's when it all started.
And it started with the calls.
Yeah. At first, she said she thought that the calls were pranks. She said there would be things like, I saw you today, you look pretty. Then notes started appearing on her door.
So it sounded like things were escalating.
They were. The notes seemed innocent at first. At one point, she even thought it could have been a child because she said they would say things like, I love you, you're so pretty, just kind of generic. The handwriting was really bad. But then the calls started becoming very specific. What she was wearing, when she came and went. For her, it really felt like someone was watching her. And then one day she came home and there was something waiting on her doorstep.
And that sounds more like a warning.
Yeah. It was a pair of red underwear. They were shredded, they were covered in bodily fluids.
And that's not random.
No. And when I say bodily fluids, I'm talking DNA, semen, and uh, so she felt like she was being targeted. She did call the police. The police came, and then a detective was sent out. She said she remembers they took it very seriously. He was in a suit. They bagged the underwear as evidence, and then nothing.
No follow up.
None. No questions about Gail, no mention of her murder. This part is what really surprises me the most because she lived in the complex. She didn't even know someone had been killed in her own complex.
So she knew Gail, she knew the story, but she didn't realize that she was living in the same apartment complex as Gail. That's just so hard to reconcile.
It is because I'm just thinking if I was the investigator, the first thing I'd want to do is talk to every single neighbor, especially one that had a stalker.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So, you know, we ended the pilot episode that we had three victims. There was Gail, there was my mother, then we talked about an unidentified victim. Now we're talking about a fourth victim.
Exactly. We have Sue living at the same place and at the same time being stalked by someone whose behavior seems to be escalating. And that sounds more like a pattern. I mean, the lady even told you, Sue told you, that she felt like she was being stalked and she would run into this man who was in this grocery store multiple
Yeah.
times, pushing a buggy, no groceries in it, but it just made her feel very strange. He had blondish hair. She said when she saw him outside, it looked reddish. But, that even sort of kind of fits the description of your father, too.
It does, and that's one possibility, and I could only imagine that her sense or her, uh, awareness of her surroundings was very heightened when you have someone stalking you. So she probably noticed everybody, but even this many years later, she remembered that there was a creepy guy in the grocery store, never actually buying groceries, and that was next door to the complex of where she lived. So, you know, here's the biggest question I have. Those red underwear, that evidence that was bagged up by the detective, where is that evidence today?
That red underwear should still exist.
Unless it was lost or destroyed or never tested. We already know in Gail's case, her evidence was destroyed. I've heard of flood, I've heard of fire. Most recently, I was reading that these refrigerators that stored evidence, there was a power outage because of a storm, and there was a lot of evidence destroyed. There's also a backlog. There's tons of articles, and it's a disorganized mess, is the best way to describe what I'm hearing about the backlog of DNA evidence.
You know, that's why you do what you do.
Right. It is. That's why we do this because, this podcast is small. I don't even think we've had 500 downloads. We're just beginning, and someone remembered something. Someone came forward with new information, at least the public hasn't heard about. Maybe this is in their investigative notes and they knew about it behind the scenes. But because of this podcast, a victim was able to come forward and share her story that may help us.
Exactly. And that's how cases move.
Yeah. So here's what we need from all of you, from our listeners. If you lived in the area, if you knew Gail, if you remember anything about that apartment complex, those calls, maybe you had the same calls, maybe you went to the same grocery store that was next to the apartment complex, because there are several apartment complexes and neighborhoods. There's no telling who may hear this and may remember something.
Absolutely. So, whatever you do, just say something, even if you feel like it is small.
Yeah, small details are what reopen cases. The Houston Police Department, the cold case divisions, they have so many cases, and especially a case that's 50 years old. Unless something new comes forward, that's a lot of manpower to put into something with no new leads. So it's up to us as the public to help them. So if you know anything, again, contact them directly. If you're not comfortable doing that, go to walkingproof.net. Our socials,
Yes, absolutely. Our socials, you can find us at Walking Proof with PJ and Shampoo. And if you have any information, you absolutely can stay anonymous if you'd like to. Just don't stay silent.
absolutely.
Somebody out there knows exactly who was watching these women. I mean, somebody has to remember something.
Yeah, and let's find the answers.
Absolutely. So we'll be back soon with the episode from Freeport, Texas, which was preempted today because of the update that we aired on Gail's case.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening. We're going to call this a bonus episode uh, because it wasn't planned, but we have some new information. Hopefully, we can all work together. So until next time, you guys have a good one.